Yeah. Brian? Yeah. Brian? No, no, oh, no, it's live. No, it's fine. It's live now. It was just going around. You need to go back here. You can close this. Wait, go back here. Go click. Click here. No. Click here. Yeah. Wait a minute, everyone. Okay, good. It's fine. No. No, it's live. Okay, you need to close this so you don't get them back. Okay. Thank you for your patience. We're live on YouTube now, and I will start recording. Welcome, everyone, to Pathways Through the Orchard. Today, we will be discussing parshat Re'eh. The first verse, very, very important verse, Re'eh. Anochi noten livnechem hayom bracha v'klala. See, I am putting before you today a blessing and a curse. And it continues by saying, what is the blessing? If we listen to the words of God, then blessing will come. What is the curse? When we don't listen to the words of God, the consequences, the results will be what we would call a curse. As in all parshas, there are many different things happening here. We're going to concentrate on two themes that are running through this parsha. The first one is about dam, blood. In the parsha, a number of times it mentions the idea of eating meat, bringing offerings, and the prohibition of consuming blood from an animal. We know that for kosher meat, the meat has to be salted. And the purpose of the salting is to remove the blood from the animal. So in the 12th chapter, the 23rd verse, it says, and this is just one, there's a whole passage here about what animals you can eat, where you can eat them, the time of the Mishkan, the time of the temple, many, many different laws. But one idea that is repeated is the idea of not eating the blood. So in this particular verse, 12:23, it says, Rak chazak lebilti achol adam. But be very strong not to eat the blood. Again, it's talking about the blood of an animal. Ki adam hu nefesh. Because the blood is the soul. Now, the Art Scroll translates nefesh as life. So in other words, the way the Art Scroll translates it is because the blood is the life or the life force of the animal. But we know that nefesh is the lowest of the 5 levels of soul. And sometimes the entire soul is called nefesh. So it continues, V'lo tochal hanefesh im habasar. In other words, don't eat the soul with the meat, meaning the soul of the animal. Well, by removing the blood, we're removing the energy of the soul of the animal. We know that in the Garden of Eden, they were vegetarians. It was only at the time of Noach, which was 10 generations, that God gave permission to eat meat. But here in this parsha, a number of times it mentions the prohibition of eating the blood. And what it says a couple of verses later, when it's talking about bringing an animal sacrifice, so it says in the 27th verse, V'yasita alotecha habasar va'adam ala mizbeach. So it says, and you will bring your offering of the meat and the blood on the altar. The altar, Hashem Elokecha, the altar of God, your God. B'dam zivachecha yeshafech al mizbeach. Abasar tochal. But the blood you will pour on the altar, and then you can eat the meat. So again, this is another way of saying that you can't eat the blood, you can eat the meat. But here it adds this idea, which again is repeated another time or two, that the blood is meant for the altar. So what does that mean? So here, again, we'll mention that the nefesh is considered the lowest level of the soul. Sometimes it's called the animal soul. The nefesh is the part of the soul most attached to the body. But here the Torah is saying it's intrinsically connected to the blood, Now we're going to go back to Vayikra. Going back to Vayikra, so in our parsha, this is not the only time we're told not to eat the blood. It comes up a number of times in the Torah. It just happens in our parsha, it's mentioned a number of times in different ways. But back in Vayikra, in parshat Acharei Mot, so it says like this, V'ish ish mi b'nei Yisrael, u'min ger b'tocham. Any person from B'nai Yisrael or a convert who lives among them, Asher Yatsud Sayid, who goes out hunting kosher animals, Sayid Chaya o Of, or permissible birds, Asher Yachel, that you're allowed to eat, Yeshafech et damo v'kisahu. You shall pour the blood out on the ground and cover it up, biafar, with dirt, with the dust of the earth. This is called kisui dam, covering up the blood. Animals that are domesticated, that are allowed to be brought to the altar and that we can eat, cattle, sheep, and goats, you don't have to cover the blood. But if you went out hunting for a deer or a ram, they're wild animals that you're allowed to eat. But if you catch them and you do kosher slaughtering, you have to cover the blood, and also for any fowl, any birds that you're allowed to eat. You cover the blood. That's called kisui dam. The next verse, though, says, so why are you covering the blood? It says, Ki nefesh kol basar damo b'nafsho. because the soul of all flesh is in the blood. Damo b'nafshohu. The blood is in the soul. V'amar livnei Yisrael, and God said to Bnei Yisrael, Dam kol basar lo tochelu. The blood of the flesh of these animals you cannot eat. Ki nefesh kol basar damohu, because the soul of the flesh of the animal is in the blood. So here we have a recurring theme, not just in our parsha, but what's interesting here is usually we translated that the soul is in the blood, or the life force of the animal. Well, the life force is the soul. The soul is the life force of any animal or human being. Is the soul is what enlivens the body. And so usually it's stated that the nefesh is in the blood. In the verse we just read, though, almost mysteriously, it's reversed. And it says, Damo b'nafshohu. The blood is in the soul. So the Eben Ezra explains this. An explanation of the Eben Ezra explains that sometimes the letter nafsho, in the soul, in the blood, can also mean with. So in other words, what started out to be like somewhat of a paradoxical statement is the soul in the blood, or is the blood in the soul? So by translating the bet as with, it means that they're intrinsically connected together, the soul and the blood. And that's why we have this prohibition of eating the blood, because even though we're allowed to eat meat, the Torah is very, very careful that if by taking out the blood, we're taking out the animal life force, which we don't want to consume, because we have enough of an animal soul as it is. Now remember, the first 10 generations did not eat meat. It was only in the 10th generation that God gave permission to Noah to eat the meat, but already the idea was that you can't eat the blood. So in the explanation of the Eben Ezra, so he, instead of using the word the nefesh, the Torah uses the nefesh. The nefesh is in the blood. The soul is in the blood. The life force is in the blood. But in this one place, he says the ruach is in the blood. The spirit is in the blood. So here it means the spirit of the animal. And even though we're allowed to eat meat, the Torah wants it very, very clear that it doesn't want us to consume and ingest and integrate the full animal soul, because then it would, in a sense, throw our whole body-soul equilibrium off balance. There would be too much animal soul. So what's interesting here is the Arizal, when he talks about the 5 levels of soul. So he mentions that in a human being, let's call it by birthright, we receive a nefesh and a ruach. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th levels of soul, neshama, which is the intellectual, the chaya, which is a more surrounding will, and the yechida is the godly spark within a human being. The Arizal says these three levels of neshama, chai, and yechida, we need to, in a sense, earn. They're not given to us like automatically. Now, the ruach is our emotional side of the psyche of the human being, and the nefesh is the basic life force of a human being. So we receive a nefesh and a ruach. In the Torah, when it talks about animals, it only mentions a nefesh. Now, anyone who is an animal owner can recognize easily that animals do have a certain level of emotional expression. You can tell when a dog is happy, when a dog is depressed, when a dog is lively, when a dog loves seeing you. There is a certain level of ruach, but the Torah only mentions the nefesh. Whereas a human being gets a nefesh and a ruach, but then has to earn the neshama. Now, even though the neshama is the intellect, we're not talking about book knowledge here. The neshama is not talking about book knowledge. Someone could have an IQ of, who knows, 160, 180. That doesn't mean that they've really mastered the level of neshama. The neshama is a different kind of wisdom, a different type of understanding than just book knowledge or facts and figures. So what I would like to do now is I want to go deeper into the whole concept of dam. First of all, we know that a human being is called Adam, an aleph and the word dam. So this, we've discussed many times, is the dam represents the body, the physical component of a human being. The aleph being a very spiritual letter. More names of God begin with the letter aleph than any other letter. It's the divine, heavenly, spiritual component of a human being. So a human being is in a sense, a bipolar two components, the spiritual and the physical, the godly and the material. Adam. So dam here we see is not just blood, but it's intrinsic in a human being. So we need to understand more the function of the nefesh. The nefesh needs a lot of clarification, a lot of rectification. And yet it has tremendous power in the nefesh, what we've been calling the animal soul. It's not bad and it's not negative, but it needs a lot of training. And in fact, there are many opinions that one of the main purposes of doing mitzvot is in order to train the nefesh to be more spiritual and not to be drawn all the time to the earthly, to the physical, to desire, to passion, to lust. That's where the animal soul can go if it's not rectified. But when it's rectified, it's a tremendous force. Passion is a wonderful thing. The libido, the sexual energy, is a wonderful energy, but it does need to be channeled and controlled and rectified. And so a lot of the mitzvah we do is to draw the nefesh into a more orderly, spiritual way of manifesting itself. We're told that when God wrote the 10 Commandments on the first luchot, the first tablets, it says, It was written with the finger of God. Charut ala luchot, engraved on the tablets. And the sages said, don't read it engraved, charut, read it cherut, freedom on the tablets. So then we'll ask, well, if we have 613 mitzvahs from the Torah, and we have quite literally thousands of laws from the rabbis, where is the freedom? Where from the moment we wake up in the morning till we go to sleep, it is just 100 blessings and mitzvah after mitzvah after mitzvah after mitzvah. So where is the freedom? And the answer is that the freedom comes from being free from the animal soul, from the nefesh ruling our lives. That's why you can see in the papers every day, rich, important, powerful, accomplished people who seemingly have everything in the world. And you see scandal after scandal after scandal, whether it's sexual, power, money, addiction. This is no matter how rich you are and powerful you are and how much intellect you have, if you're being ruled by your lower nature, you are a slave to your lower nature. And you see people who have seemingly everything in the world, they can't control themselves. And therefore they get, like I said, scandal after scandal. That is the freedom, is channeling the nefesh, channeling the dam within Adam. Now, another meaning of dam, of the root, daled mem, is dome. Dome means silence. Where do we learn this from? After the two sons of Aaron died, when they brought an offering that was not commanded. So obviously Aaron is very broken. His two sons have just died. And Moshe, in comforting him, explains to him that even though in one sense it appears they did something wrong, and perhaps we can translate their deaths into some kind of a punishment. But Moshe was explaining that on a certain level, they were on a higher level than you or I. And then it says, Vayidom Aharon. Aaron became silent. In other words, he accepted what Moshe was saying, and he became silent. But this two-letter gate, 3 letters is called the root shorish. But the 2 letters of a 3-letter root, the most 2 prominent letters, is called the gate, the sha'ar. So again, dome means silent, but that's also in a human being. Adam, that there is this level of silence. So Rav Ginsburg points out that Adam and Chava is from the root to express. Yechaveh dat. We say it in the Psalms that we say on Shabbat morning. Yechaveh dat expresses knowledge. So Chava represents expression. Adam, in a certain way, expresses silence. So here we had in the first couple this connection of expression and silence. Now, obviously, every male has both silence and speech, and every female has silence and speech. But here we're seeing where where the emphasis is. Now, this is connected to a word that we've discussed many times, what Rav Ginsburg calls the most mysterious and paradoxical word in the entire Tanakh, and that's chashmal. Chashmal, which is translated today in modern Hebrew into electricity, but we know that chashmal is made up of two words. Chash means silent, mal means speaking. And in the vision of Yechezkel, Ezekiel, he saw this energy, and it's very hard to translate. But the sages said that it was a manifestation of a certain type of angel that sometimes is silent and sometimes is speaking. But Kabbalah and Chassidut explain that a deeper understanding is not just there's a time for silence and a time for speech, like King Solomon said, when he said there's a time for this, there's a time for that, there's a time to be silent, there's a time to speak. But there's also the level of what's called the sounds of silence, or the revelation that Eliyahu Navi had, which is called Kol D'mama Daka, a thin, silent voice. And here, the voice is D'mama, from Dam. Kol D'mama Daka. The Daka means thin, or really the silent voice. So here we see a great paradox, because when we talk about the four levels of creation, in English, mineral, vegetable, animal, human. But in Hebrew, it's domem. Domem, from the word dam, is the mineral world. Why? Because it doesn't speak. So we could say trees don't speak either, but actually we know now that they actually communicate with each other, not in a voice that we can hear, but they do communicate. Animals, of course, communicate, and humans. So in Hebrew, mineral is called domem. Then someach, meaning growing vegetation. Then chaya, living animals. And a human being is called midaber, a speaker. So here we have a tremendous, we'll call it a paradox, that in the name Adam, the dam, part of the meaning is silent, and yet a human being is called a midaber. And that's why in the Torah, when it says that God breathed or blew into the nostrils of the human being that he was forming, and he became a nefesh chaya, a living being. So Ankala said a speaking being, a speaker. So here we have in a human being an aspect of silence, dom, dam, adam, but we also have the level of speaker. Midaber has the dalet and the mem, but backwards. Midaber is you have the mem first and then the dalet. Now going back to the idea of domem, the mineral world is called domem. So this is one of the secrets of the earth. There's a number of words for earth, eretz, but like the dirt itself is called adama. Soil is called adama. Adama is Adam with a hey. This is what is frequently referred to as Mother Earth. It's Adam with a hey. The feminine of Adam in this aspect is the earth, the soil. So here again, we see a deep connection between all these roots of Adam, Adama, Dam, Domem, Domem. Now we'll add another one. And first of all, when God creates man in his image, it actually says, but two words actually in God's form and image. The word for form is damut, which is also from the root of dam. Now this brings us to a very deep understanding of this root, dalet and mem, is in Hebrew, different words for likeness. When God created man in his likeness and his image. Demut there means in his likeness. So there's a lot of discussion. What does that mean? Because God has no physical approximation. And then we get into free will and different attributes of God that are like God. Domeh. In Hebrew, if something is like something else, it's domeh. So another connection is imagination. Imagination is called dimayon, from the word dam. Imagination. Now we know that imagination can be rectified or unrectified. A unrectified imagination leads us to lots of trouble, big problems, where it leads us to all kinds of fantasies, not in the positive sense. On the other hand, we've discussed this before, that the Rambam and the Ramchal, when discussing prophecy, say that prophecy is channeled through the power of imagination. When the power of imagination is fixed, it can lead to prophecy. So this brings us back to the idea of dam and nefesh. The soul is in the blood. Now, when it's not clarified, when the dam is not clarified, when the nefesh, the animal soul, is not clarified, then it leads to a kind of false type of imagination, of fantasies, unrealistic. And as I said, it could get us in lots of trouble. On the other hand, when the power of imagination, and again, it comes from the root of dam, is rectified, it leads to prophecy. So it's interesting, in this week's parsha, there's a whole passage about false prophets. When this energy, when this attribute of imagination is not fixed. And it could be that a person begins as having a true level of prophecy, but for various reasons goes off the track, and the power that he's attained becomes a very negative thing. So the Torah discusses in length how do you know the difference between a true prophet and a false prophet? What do you do with a false prophet? Should you listen? Shouldn't you listen? How do you know? But it's interesting because it's connected to this whole idea in this same parsha about not eating the blood and bringing the blood to the altar where it can be lifted up and sanctified. Okay, we'll stop there with this insight. It's something for us all to think about because we all have the level of nefesh. We all have the aspect of an animal soul. But again, that animal soul is not negative in of itself, but it does need to be channeled, controlled, rectified, and clarified. So that's what we were discussing, and especially that in the name Adam, we have the word dam. But again, that dam also is connected to a certain level of silence and speaking, that's part of every human being is the more inner silent nature and the desire to express oneself. And both of these are very positive, but we all have to know when's the right time to be silent and when's the right time to speak. And lastly, we discussed this idea of the same root being likeness, of making comparisons, of that type of intellect that can make comparisons. Okay, that was insight number 1. The next theme that we want to discuss really permutes this entire parsha. And I might have missed one or two, but I found 10 different expressions of the same theme that runs through. I'm going to read just 2 of them, but it repeats it at least 10 times. I counted 10 times, but I might have missed 1 or 2. And that is, I'll read 2 of them, but each one is worded a little bit differently. This parsha talks a lot about a future place that God will choose to put his name. It doesn't use the word temple. It doesn't even use the word Mishkan. It says over and over, and I'll read 2 of them. So here it's talking about bringing your offerings, and there are many different types of offerings. There's guilt offerings, there's thanksgiving offerings, there's a whole range of guilt offerings, there's holiday offerings, there is mincha offerings, there is the first fruit offerings, there's the second truma, Meiser Sheni offerings. And God is expressing, you will take all of these offerings to the place that I will choose to put my name. And again, it never mentions the name Yerushalayim, never mentions the name temple, but it uses that language. So I'm going to read 2 of them. Here it's talking about bringing your offerings. Ki im ela makom asher yivchar Hashem Elokeichem mikol shivtechem l'sum et shemo sham l'shachno tidrshu ubata shama. Rather, to the place that God your God will choose from among all of your tribes to place his name, there his presence will be felt, and you can seek him out, and there you shall go. That's the language. Another one. Here again, talking about bringing different offerings. Not all the offerings were animal offerings. V'yachalta lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'makom asher yivchar l'shaken shemo sham ma'asar degancha tiroshcha v'yitzarecha v'chorot b'karcha utzonecha, leman tilmad yira et Hashem Elokecha kol hayamim. And you shall eat before God, your God, in the place that he will choose to place his presence and his name. There you will bring your tithes of the field and of the oil and of the vineyard and of your different animals. And there you will learn to have awe of God all of your days. Meaning the idea that going to this place, now we know that this place is the temple in Jerusalem, but it's interesting that 10 times or more it says the exact same thing over and over again. So this theme runs throughout the entire portion. The whole idea of that there will be a place where God's presence will be felt, where God's presence can be sought, and there you will go and you'll experience the awe of God. This was the experience of the temple. So what I'd like to do with the rest of the class here is speak a little bit about Yerushalayim and the temple, because that is the theme here. And what I'm going to be quoting is from a book called The Soul of Jerusalem. It was compiled by Rabbi Shlomo Katz, who I just want to mention with a big mazel tov. His wife gave birth to their 6th child on Friday, I believe, a girl. We now have 5 girls and a boy. And mazel tov to Rabbi Shlomo Katz. He compiled teachings from Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach about Jerusalem and the temple. And it's called The Soul of Jerusalem. It's an excellent book, highly recommended. So I just picked out some ideas that are connected to this theme that runs through our parsha, that God will choose a place from among all of the tribes to place his name and his presence. And there, that will be the central meeting place between God and man. So Reb Shlomo points out there's a midrash that calls the temple with the same language of Bereshit, that there's something about the temple that has to do with newness, with creation. So Reb Shlomo points out, what was the experience of coming to the temple? So he says that when someone went to the temple, when they would walk away with the feeling of, I can start all over again, or I can renew myself. Why? Because I feel renewed now. The experience was a very real, not just intellectual, but an emotional, almost a tactile experience with the smell of the ketoret, hearing the music, seeing the glory of the temple, being with all of Israel gathering there, that a person would feel newness. And so one of the many, many ways to understand the powerful experience of being at the temple was this feeling of renewal, of bereshit, of connecting with one's reshit. Reshit is connected to what are called the first fruits. The first fruits are called Reshit, the first of your produce. So the experience of the temple connected us with our own first fruits, meaning our deepest level of neshama, deepest level of nefesh, ruach, neshama, chai, and yechida. This idea of the root soul could be experienced at the temple. Now, many people, I think everyone knows that the Kotel, the Western Wall, is a very, very powerful place, but it itself was not actually part of the temple. It was part of the retaining wall for what's called Harabait. In other words, let's say this is the Kotel. The Temple Mount was based on the Kotel, and then you had the temple on the Temple Mount. The Kotel was a retaining wall. So you can imagine if one goes to the Kotel and has a spiritual experience, how much more so would it be to be in the temple on the Temple Mount? Now, there's a saying in the Gemara or the Zohar, I'm not sure which one, that in Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's consciousness, the temple was never destroyed. The question is, what does that mean? The temple, the physical temple, was most certainly destroyed. So what does it mean that in his consciousness, the temple wasn't destroyed? So I'm putting that in there. Reb Shlomo made a different comment, but I'm connecting the two. So Reb Shlomo said, in a certain sense, the temple wasn't destroyed. Why? Because every time we pray, we turn towards the temple. And it even says in the Shulchan Aruch that we should imagine ourselves standing before the Holy of Holies, in the presence of the Shekhinah. So in the first part, we talked about imagination, of the power of Dam when rectified, Domeh, Demayon, Koach HaMidameh. So here, every time we pray, on a certain level, we are in the temple. So yes, the physical temple was destroyed, but the conceptual temple, the spiritual temple, was never destroyed. Every time we turn to pray, we are in the temple. Now Reb Shlomo mentions another thing, and he says that everyone knows in their life that there is a desire, a need for intimacy, to feel close to one's spouse, one's children, one's friends, one's country, whatever it is. The idea of intimacy means to be close, to feel that closeness. So Reb Shlomo said that in our day, there's a tremendous longing for intimacy. The world is so material and is by the minute changing technologically. And obviously with AI and everything that is going on, and the world population at being over 8 billion, there is definitely a feeling of getting lost in the cloud, in the crowd, in the impersonal level of things. Email is a tremendous thing. but it's not as personal. All of the communications today, Facebook and email and fax and telegram and all of these different ways of communicating, there's a distance between us and being in the presence of another person. So there's a tremendous longing for intimacy. And Reb Shlomo says that was one of the experiences of being in the temple. And the fact that we have no temple now speaks volumes about the idea of this lack of intimacy. We don't even know what we're missing by not having the temple. Because again, as we read in the verses here, God says, my presence will be there. My name will be there. You can come there and experience my presence and seek me out. Well, that's as intimate as you can go. God is like offering an intimate relationship here. So that was the experience of the temple. And not having the physical temple, we barely know what we're missing. But it's a tremendous thing. So Reb Shlomo connects it to another idea that's very connected. It's different. And he says, if you take a watch or a clock and you open it up and see the way it works, so usually you'll see there's a middle wheel with spokes that all the different components of the watch or clock are intrinsically connected to this one central wheel. So Reb Shlomo says the whole world is like a clock, and the middle wheel is missing. People don't realize that the temple not being built, not being in its place, is indicative of the world kind of like losing its like it's been repeated many, many times that we look at the world today and we have this feeling that the moral and ethical balance of the world is just off kilter, is not working. The clock is not working correctly. And Reb Shlomo connects that this inner wheel that makes the whole thing work correctly is missing. And this is very connected to what it says in the Tanakh, that when Shlomo Melech built the temple, it mentions that there was peace for 40 years. There was the first 40 years of the temple, there was peace. Everything was working the way it should. Unfortunately, we're human beings, and we ourselves lost the connection to that inner wheel. Now here, I want to say something about Yerushalayim. So the Yerushalayim, so first we learn about it when after Avram saves the people of Sodom and he brings his nephew back, Lot. And it says that the high priest of Shalem, Melchizedek, came out to greet him. So according to tradition, this place called Shalem was Yerushalayim. You can hear in the word Yerushalayim, Shalem. The second part of Yeru comes from after the Akedah, after the offering of Yitzchak, where Yeru is connected to God will be seen in this place. Yerushalayim, but also God said to Avram, now I know that you have yira you have awe and respect and honor for me. So Yerushalayim is in a certain way is a connection between the word for seeing, which is our parsha. Ra'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha v'klala. See, ra'eh. So that's Yerushalayim. But it's also the idea of the awe and fear of God. But here, fear we always translate as really being honor and respect, not afraid of God, but having this awesome respect for God. So that is the basis of the name Yerushalayim. And it's called Ir HaKodesh, the holy city, Ir HaKodesh. And Ir, so the Ir is Ayin Yud Resh, but if you change the Ayin to an Aleph, which is done many times in Kabbalah and Chassidut, you have the same letters of the basic letters of Yerushalayim. The Yira becomes Yeru, but it's based on Yira, to be seen and to be in a state of awe. So Ir, city, so it's brought down that what is a city? Along with the word Ir means city. Ir comes from the root air, ayin resh, which means to awaken, to get up, to wake up. So we're told that a city is a place where people, it's awake. Now, Tel Aviv is called the city that never sleeps. Anyone who's been in major cities, my experience was in New York. You could go, we talk about Manhattan here. You go to Manhattan, it doesn't matter what hour of the day, there are people out. There are things open. People are on the streets. So Ir means a place of awakening. So Reb Shlomo says, Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, that Yerushalayim is the headquarters of waking up, of realizing one's essence, of waking up, as we said in the first insight, to newness, to renewal, is intrinsic with the idea of Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Okay, we'll end with one last one. Again, it's a great book called The Soul of Jerusalem. The last one is just a deep insight, not just about Yerushalayim, not just about the temple, but Reb Shlomo connected it to that. And this idea is the more in Chassidut, we talk about Pnimiyut and Chitzoniyut. Pnimiyut means like an inner, deep, intrinsic understanding or experience. Chitzoniyut is chutz, is an outside, superficial type of experience. So Reb Shlomo says the more outside something is, the less whole it needs to be, because it's just the outer veneer. And okay, if it has a few chips here, a few cracks, it's just an outside kind of experience or vessel. But the more inner something is, the more it's connected to a need to be whole. So Reb Shlomo connects this to the temple. And of course, now that we don't have the temple, because the temple represents the most panimiyut, the inner of the inner. That's why in the temple itself, you have the outer court, then you have the inner sanctuary, and then you have the inner of the inner, the Holy of Holies. And so Reb Shlomo is saying that lacking the inner work, remember the idea of the clock, lacking the inner wheel of the clock means that there's a feeling of wholeness that is missing in the world. It's missing in each person, and it's missing in Israel, and it's missing in the whole planet, because the temple represents the most inner of inner of inner, and therefore it needs to be whole. So if you don't have the inner, you don't have the sense of wholeness. So let's end with a blessing that we need to be whole. We need intimacy. We need to be close. And Bezrat Hashem, we will live to see Mashiach and the third temple, which will be called a place of prayer for all people. May we see it and experience it.